Hello, Windows Server community. I am Sarah Music, a cloud solution architect at Intel. And today we're going to talk about serving Windows Server top 5 ways. Intel Emerald Rapids, which is the code name for Intel's 5th generation Xeon Scalable processor, empowers work. So that's our agenda for today. Here's what I want to talk about in talking about the top 5 ways that Intel Emerald Rapids serves Windows Server. So we're going to do 2 things. I want to start with Windows Server 2022 and talk about how that drips down and communicates and interacts with the processor, and then how the processor serves the operating system, because the marriage between the two has done a lot within the past couple of years, both for 2022 and now coming 2025, for these 5 key topics. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but these were 5 that I keep hearing about in the market and wanted to cover. So the first is performance for AI-enabled workloads, and I'll stipulate what I mean by AI-enabled in a minute. Improved security benefits, seamless hybrid architecture, so hybrid being a name of the game, containers and reinterpreting the private cloud. So I talked about hybrid, but what does the private cloud look like moving into 2024? And then sustainability. So like I said, my name is Sarah Music. I'm a cloud solution architect at Intel. We joke, why would Intel have cloud solution architects? Intel, you're a silicon company. And the reason is because our silicon sits in Azure. So if our customers are going to be successful, they want a more informed approach about considering Intel Xeon and in running workloads in Azure. We were able to bring some information to bear that makes us really successful with our friends at Microsoft, and it's been a very great partnership to co-work with customers together in Azure. So I want to level set before we get to the discussion of how this applies to Windows Server. And I want to talk a little bit about Emerald Rapids. So Intel's 5th generation Xeon Scalable processor released December 14th. So we had this big launch event in New York City this past December. So what exactly is 5th gen Xeon going to do in general, and what is it going to do for Windows Server? So it's a processor purpose-built for AI. This is something that we've seen coming for a while. The LLM and generative AI explosion this year, of course, is new, but AI as an industry has been evolving for quite some time. So this has been landing in the market at a really good time. Advanced matrix extensions, which I'll talk about as an accelerator, is going to be a key piece to that AI story. And without diving further into it, there's quite a bit that you can find on our website about Emerald Rapids performance, but this is the beauty that we're going to be focusing on today. So AI, I said I wanted to talk about workloads enabled by AI. So taking advantage in a Windows Server environment of the performance of Emerald Rapids, this is what I mean. So in 2024, of course, what discussion would be complete in technology without discussing AI? So yes, there is generative AI. But one explosion that we're seeing in the market, and that you may be seeing inside your organization, is AI-enabled workloads. So operational workloads and discrete applications that consume that data and may have an AI component. And a lot of those land on Windows Server. They're exploding in 2024 as organizations get more sophisticated in their consumption of data from big data environments and from LLMs. And so AI-enabled applications are going to be really important, those consumer applications that receive the data. So there's a key piece here that could be really helpful, which is not only the performance of the CPUs and higher core counts, but accelerators, built-in accelerators to the CPU that increase throughput and offload functionality to drive higher performance. And that's exactly what Emerald Rapids does. So as you have operational applications that are sending in Windows Server 2022, you're going to be able to take advantage of that performance. So the top line, if you're looking at that blue, is against Sapphire Rapids, which is our previous generation. So just even in one generation, we've had a significant uplift in performance. But against third generation, which is Ice Lake, and looking before that, we had a lot of customers install with Cascade Lake. The performance for, general purpose compute, for inferencing, up to 14 times higher inference and training performance, it's kind of staggering. So just within the past couple of years, the changes to using an application for AI on Windows Server, the opportunities there have opened up pretty significantly. Make sure that you're on the right processor, because all the performance gains that you'll get from a software perspective out of Windows Server 2022, don't limit yourself. Make sure that you're performing those tasks with a processor that's going to hang with you with some of those, I would say, tight AI capabilities. So security, we just talked about AI. What are the security benefits that can be brought to bear between Intel Emerald Rapids and Windows Server 2022? So one thing I want to highlight from a security perspective that is a trend, a concerning trend that has been emerging over the past couple of years, is the issue of firmware-based malware or firmware attacks. So bad actors are realizing that organizations are getting savvier about protecting software in the middle of the stack. So they're starting to attack lower. And this is something that they've been doing for a couple of years, but it's gaining steam. It's not discussed as much historically, but it is growing in popularity, which should be a huge concern for any organization, including those using Windows Server. And unfortunately, it is really difficult to detect. So it makes it a growing preference for bad actors. And there was a sort of a watershed moment in 2021 when Security Signals released their study that said that 80% of enterprises have had a firmware attack of some kind. That's a staggering statistic. And that was 3 years ago. So surprisingly, from a full-on study perspective, not much work has been done since then, since that 2021 study. But if that's kind of the bellwether of what we're looking at today, based on data we have 3 years ago, it's probably higher than that at this point. So the firmware level protection is going to be key in protecting your Windows environment. So where does that leave us? How can Emerald Rapids help? And how can the features that Windows Server 2022 offers, based on the functionality of Emerald Rapids, how can that help? So the key piece of this is support for secured core server hardware. And there are 3 things that I wanted to highlight. First off is Intel TPM. So, trusted platform module. So this is, going to help you with your storage of keys, support for secure boot, and allow for remote attestation, all key pieces. This is so key because so much happens at boot. When there are firmware attacks, it's usually at boot. So as you'd expect. BootGuard being another, so this works in conjunction with TPM to provide kind of a layered approach. So it is firmware verification during boot, which of course is going to be essential to partnering with TPM. And it's helping establish hardware-based root of trust. And then, of course, Intel TXT. So TXT is measured launch, where hardware measures the integrity of the software components during boot. So, and it also assists with isolation. So we have several key aspects here that Windows Server 2022 exposes to protect yourself and to protect your organization. So this is another way in which you can protect your organization. And this tips over a little bit in what I'm about to talk about from the standpoint of hybrid architecture. But confidential computing and the use of TDX or Intel Trust Domain Extensions. So this is another feature set or accelerator that allows for VM-based or virtualization-based security. in isolation. So isolating VMs from each other and from the hypervisor. So this is something that you can do in the data center in a Windows environment. This is also something you can do in Azure. Leverage TDX in Azure with Windows Server in a confidential computing environment. So having that full hybrid picture from a security perspective is huge. So confidential computing as a market is exploding, and it will continue to do that. Just confidential computing itself, running things in a secure enclave, is growing. So I mentioned I wanted to talk about hybrid. So far we've talked about AI, we've talked about the security piece. Security, throw that over to the wall into hybrid. So what, hybrid architecture, you have the data center, you have Azure. What is this going to look like? So the Flexera State of the Cloud report, the 2024 report hasn't come out yet. It's really close to, usually they release it in April, but this is the 2023 report, and there were some pretty significant findings here. So organizations really do tend to posture as hybrid organizations. So if you look at that hybrid number, as far as who's using both Azure and who's using the data center, that's really the vast bulk of organizations. So that means that having that unified approach or that unified strategy between the two, between the data center and Azure, is going to be key. So what does it look like to have that unified approach? Well, so Intel processors are in 100% of the regions and availability zones in Azure. So the consistency between the data center and the public cloud in Azure is going to be key. Running the same VM supported processor as you do in the data center. And for Windows Server 2025 and beyond, which is meant to support the hybrid adaptive cloud, as Microsoft calls it, is key in being supported by that architecture. So Azure Arc enabled servers, that's another key piece of this. So if you're going to manage, resources in the data center through Arc, having that unified infrastructure platform through Emerald Rapids is going to be a big help. Containers. So hopefully you see a through line here. Security, obviously key piece. We had to talk about AI up front because everybody's talking about AI. We had security. We talk about hybrid. And now we're going to reinterpret hybrid a little bit. Of course, you can run containers in Azure. A lot of organizations are really digging running containers and reinterpreting the data center. So what does the new private cloud look like on containers? So Windows Server 2022 and going into 2025 offers enhanced support for containers. And this new era of private cloud in containers is becoming a key piece of modernization strategy and digital transformation for organizations who have those initiatives afoot. And some of the numbers that came out of COVID, the COVID era and post-COVID, given some of the decisions that were driven by having such a remote workforce as far as digital transformation, we're just seeing that gain steam. The numbers around how much money organizations are spending on digital transformation are staggering. Containers are a key piece of that, and container support in Windows Server 2022. Excellent. And the base images, you've got a little bit of variety. So of course there's Windows Server Core, which is a little bit smaller and more lightweight, and the Nano Server. So you can run that on bare metal. You can run that on a hypervisor. We are seeing a lot of organizations are starting to explore moving away from traditional hypervisors and having expanded base images for more flexibility helps a lot. So when I say moving away from traditional hypervisors, I do mean VMware. So a lot of organizations are approaching Microsoft and Intel and asking the question, do we still want to stick with VMware? Do we want to explore alternatives? And running bare metal containers in the data center on Windows Server are one of the options. Another option is doing that on Hyper-V. So if your organization still is really married to the idea of a hypervisor and running containers inside of VMs, you could do that with Hyper-V. So if you still want that virtualized environment, you can do that. Or you could look at Azure Arc. So you have quite a number of opportunities and options at your fingertips, whether you want to manage those containers from Arc, whether you want to run bare metal on Windows Server, or whether you want that virtualized environment with Hyper-V. But this, from a modernization perspective, looking at legacy applications in the data center for organizations should provide quite a bit. So how does Emerald Rapids help Windows Server with all these wonderful opportunities? So there were 3 things that I wanted to focus on. CPU performance, to state it really simply, CPU performance does equal container performance. There's a direct correlation between container performance and CPU performance. If you're looking to run containers and you do that on, say, an Intel Cascade Lake or a 2nd generation Xeon scalable processor, before you can do that, you're not going to get the performance that potentially you'd be hoping for. And even from a sustainability perspective or an energy efficiency perspective, you've got better options. And I'm going to talk about that last with sustainability. But here are 3 ways that Intel Rapids can help from a container perspective for Windows Server. So it can handle compute-intensive workloads. We talked about the performance up front. So, again, going back to that number up to 2.1 times average, the performance gain over 3rd generation Xeon, which was Ice Lake. So, a lot of organizations we're seeing are looking at Cascade Lake or Sky Lake, maybe even before, and they're ready to refresh. It's kind of that season. It improves parallelism, so up to 1.9 times better inter-socket bandwidth than 3rd gen. So that piece from a parallelism perspective is really important, the inter-socket bandwidth. And then it empowers better allocation and scaling. So from a scaling perspective, up to 3.6 times higher throughput than 3rd gen. So if you have a cluster that you want to scale, throughput's going to be a big issue as far as maintaining the integrity of the performance of the cluster. So last, we're going to talk about sustainability. So we've had AI, we've talked about security, we've talked about hybrid, and we've talked about containers hybrid, and one of the options for a hybrid, of course, being containers. What does all of this mean from a sustainability perspective? Depending on the nature of your organization, sustainability may be a super hot topic, or it may not get as much scrutiny, but this is always a great narrative to bring back to leadership to talk about. So Windows Server 2022 and its energy efficiency and Emerald Rapids energy efficiency is a driver for sustainability. So that's an overview of the top 5 ways that Intel 5th generation Xeon scalable processor serves Windows Server 2022, and this will continue moving into 2025. So whether it be in the data center or whether it be in Azure, we have over 100 million Intel Xeon processors deployed. So you can rely on us for consistency. You can rely on us for our ubiquity. And I just thank you for your time and your attention today.